Hi, this is writer and director Charlie Steeds, and you're watching Werewolf Castle with my director's commentary. I'll start off by just explaining how this film came to be, which was that I'd made another werewolf film the year before, A Werewolf in England, and when that came out on DVD, the company who'd hired me to make the film, High Flyers, they got in touch and they wanted another werewolf film. And they had this title in mind, Werewolf Castle, where we basically knew that they wanted werewolves to be in a castle, but outside of that, pretty much everything was left for me to come up with. And so, as a filmmaker, I like to take on films that are different from other things that I've done. You know, I don't like to repeat myself. So even though I just made a werewolf film, I wanted to do something that was really different. And the idea of doing a medieval werewolf movie, a sort of fantasy film, really appealed to me. I'm not really a huge fan of the fantasy genre, and having actually now made this film and watching it back, I realised that fantasy does not give me the same sort of buzz that a horror film does. But that said, I am really happy with this film, and I did have an absolute blast making it, travelling all around the country with quite a lot of different actors, and having people in suits of armour and with swords. It was actually something I'd been wanting to do for a while. So when they first came to me asking for the movie, there was actually another film pitch that I'd been working on for a few years prior, which was a sort of Viking movie with a working title, Berserkers, which basically was about a Viking settlement that was raided by sort of trolls and goblins and ogres that had come from the woods and taken all the women and children. And so a group of knights go on a bit of a kamikaze mission into the forest to try and rescue the women and children, and it's all very bloody, and they've been massacred, and there's bodies strewn everywhere, and in the woods the knights essentially find sort of magic mushrooms and eat them, and then start to see everything in very psychedelic cosmic colours, and through the power of the magic mushrooms they have this sort of outrageous strength and courage to then defeat all the trolls and goblins, whilst it also would look like a sort of crazy colourful psychedelic Disney movie. So that was an idea that I'd had for ages, and I've basically taken some elements of that film pitch, Berserkers, and put it into Werewolf Castle. So now we have Thorfinn at his settlement, and now it's werewolves that come along and raid the settlement, and then the knights have to go off on a quest to the castle. Obviously the castle had to be the main element of the film because it's called Werewolf Castle. We shot the movie under a different title, actually. Silverblade was the title that we shot the film under, which I thought was a bit like Silver Bullet, but the medieval version, Silverblade, which I kind of liked, but no, the title is now Werewolf Castle. So it was a really fun experience to get to finally have, knights in armour and stuff like that. It was something that I'd been wanting to do. It seems to be ever popular in the low budget filmmaking. For some reason, people are making medieval movies and sort of Game of Thrones rip-offs, and I just wanted to try my hand at it as well to see how it was and what it would look like. So that's what we did. The scene that you're watching here was actually the very last scene that we shot. This is down in Cornwall, and this would have been July or August of 2021. This is months after the main shoot had finished, and the actors here, obviously we've got Rhys Connolly, who was the lead in A Werewolf in England, and I wanted to bring him back and have him as a villain in this movie. So he plays Wolfstan and does a fantastic job, and as you can see has a little bit of a shabby wig. We were very worried about the wig because it's difficult to pull off a convincing wig, but there was two reasons I really needed it. I mean, one was that Wolfstan is very ungroomed, and he would have long scraggly hair, which Rhys does not, but I wanted Rhys in the role and he nails the role, so I'm glad we did it, but I wanted Rhys to have this look, and it really does sort of transform his look. And the other reason is because I wanted a transformation scene where the wig would be ripped open, and a werewolf head would emerge, which does come into the film later on, and I'll talk about that when we get to it. But that was part of the reason I really wanted to include a transformation. And the other actor in that scene is Jamie, playing the little boy, who's not an actor, but he is, at the time, I guess he was a sort of stepbrother of mine, and he's just like the most cute and adorable little kid, and he desperately wanted to be in a film. So I got him along. He actually wanted to be an actor, and he did a great little job. This where we filmed these bits. This is up in York, Merton Farm, and God, we were just. I mean, this whole film we were so lucky with the locations that we got, but this particular location really blew me away. I needed a sort of medieval village, and there I am on Google having a little look, trying to find places, and this one just looked fantastic. But really, I was just going off Google Images, and so I'd written all these scenes set in this medieval village. You know, the sort of the hall where the knights come into, and the different houses, and Grimbold's house, and all these different things. But really, I was just going off some Google Images, and for all I know, they might not have even been the actual location. I didn't have time to go and visit. You know, we made this film in February and March of 2021. It was absolutely the peak of COVID-19 lockdowns, which was a great thing for getting the locations. There's probably no way we would have got any of these locations or at the prices we got them if it were not a lockdown, and all of these places obviously were shut. But I didn't have time to go all the way up to York and scout this location. So I showed up for the first time on the first day of filming. We had 3 shoot days at Merton Park, and I had no idea what it was going to look like. In fact, the night before, as I went to bed, I was in an absolute panic, because I was looking over the scenes. I'm thinking, we've got Baron Magnus's, sort of town hall where he talks to the knights, and we've got these different houses where things needs to happen in, and I don't even know if there is an interior of any houses or halls or anything like that. So when we showed up at the place, I mean, I was absolutely over the moon, and we could have included way more houses and way more stuff, because the place was brilliant. This little section here, though, actually was shot in Cornwall. This is just down in the stables in Cornwall, so just to save a little bit of money, we did this scene here. On the floor there is Patrick, our sound man, who I asked him to step in and play this dying villager, and he kind of, well, he didn't agree at all, actually, but I had to I tempted him with probably alcohol and stuff like this, and promises that I probably didn't keep, but I got him to come and play this villager for this first werewolf scene. And then this stuff is obviously miles away in York. We shot this film back to back with another film for High Flyers, which at the moment is called The Bloody Tower, which is a film set in the Tower of London, and is a sort of supernatural drama. But basically, and this was the first time I've ever attempted this, I shot the 2 films back to back. So it was a 6.5 week shoot, which is the longest I've ever shot for. Usually I shoot for 22 days. Almost every film I do is a 22-day long shoot. The longest one I ever did was Winter Skin, which was a 26 or 27-day shoot. But this was a 6.5 week block of filming, which was exhausting. But I was well up for it, because we'd all been stuck in lockdown for all of 2019 pretty much, and I was just desperate by this point to get back on set. So the idea of 6.5 weeks of solid filming with all these different actors in all these different locations was extremely appealing to me. And so that's what we did, but you will see actors and locations sort of crossing over between the 2 films. So where Inga and Thorfinn make love and then get killed by the werewolf in that stable is also where we built the entire dungeon cells for the Bloody Tower. And Richard Rowden, who plays the lead character Henry in Bloody Tower, has a sort of little part in this film as Grimbold, Thorfinn's dad, who you just saw get killed. So sort of everyone's crossing over into each film, and we basically shot the film, it would be one day we would be doing Bloody Tower, and then the next day, you'd have to sort of remind yourself, right, now we're on to Werewolf Castle, and then you'd flip back the next day back to Bloody Tower, and that's kind of how it worked, because I could utilize a lot of the same locations. They're both medieval films, and also the same cast. People were going backwards and forwards, which was all really fun. One of the things I did know I wanted for my fantasy film was to have a sort of fantasy world map. And so I got one created, which you can see here, and then I had this idea to do this opening title sequence, which I actually just filmed on my bedroom floor with some little candles, and that's how this opening sequence came together. But I knew I wanted the map, and this sort of land of Bragon and the different villages, Grittleton Marsh. You saw earlier we had the Grittleton Marsh. Grittleton Marsh is a destination that has started to show up in a lot of my different scripts. It's sort of just a fictional town that I keep mentioning, and we actually, for this film, got a Grittleton Marsh wooden sign made, which you saw at the beginning of the film, sort of hanging in this little village. So here come the knights, and let me just talk you through the cast we have here. And this is the town hall that I mentioned where, like I said, I didn't know if these houses had an interior at all. So when I found this, I was blown away. And when we showed up at this place, Merton Park, Merton Farm, when we showed up here, my contact there was basically no one to introduce us or show us around the place, so we literally just grabbed our kit and went walking straight on in, and we were actually uninterrupted all day long until about sort of 6 or 7 p.m. when someone finally realised we were actually filming here. But as you can see, the location's absolutely stunning. I'll talk you through the actors. Here, talking to everyone at the head of the table, is Rick Carter, who I'd never worked with before and found him through auditioning. He's playing Baron Magnus. Beside him is James Swanton, who has acted for me a couple of times before, Vampire Virus, and A Werewolf in England, and he actually lives up in York. So he was actually able to bring us along all of our extras. So all of the villagers were all there thanks to James. As far as our knights go, this is Tim Cartwright, who is playing Hamlin, Wiltshire, and Tim has worked for me a whole bunch of times, starting with the Barge People, and then in A Werewolf in England, of course, and here I just wanted to sort of write him in as the leader of this group of knights. And beside him is Greg Draven, playing Thomas Fairhurst. Greg is someone I was sort of aware of online on Twitter and stuff like that, and I mean, just look at him, he's got a perfect look for this sort of medieval movie, and so it was a no-brainer that I was going to need to audition him and try and get him into this film. Beside him is Derek Nelson, who is also my sort of right-hand man when it comes to the production of these movies, and so Derek on Werewolf Castle was like our production coordinator. He arranged travel, he drove everyone around, he changes my lens, he makes the lunch, but basically keeps the whole production moving along. He is my right-hand man. So he also had this little part of Osmond, obviously, the knight that's first to die, but I had to get him into the film somewhere. And then also Jay, who's playing Hal, which was a really interesting character to cast because I'd worked with Jay once before on Vampire Virus in a very, very small role, and I put out a casting call for Hal, and I had a very specific idea of what I wanted for Hal, this sort of evil knight who, or not evil, but this very sort of dark-hearted knight with a past of violence, a very tormented guy, and also he needed to be threatening and menacing, which luckily Jay has. Jay's very tall, so Tim is a very short actor, Peter is a very short actor, and then later on I cast the actor Ricardo as Griff, who's also very short. So I've got these short actors always around Jay, which Jay is taller already, but I was purposely trying to make him as tall as he could possibly look at all times. So I was always trying to frame him next to smaller actors to make him look gigantic. But when Jay applied, I pretty much I knew Jay, and I just knew that he was not right for the part. I couldn't see it. I thought he was too young. I thought he was sort of too clean cut looking. I just couldn't see how he could be Hal. But throughout all of the auditions, Jay kept bringing more and more. This was all done through self-tapes. His tapes just sort of got better and better, and he kind of seemed hell-bent on he was going to get this role and determined to prove to me that he was Hal. And so I asked him, if you can do a sort of haircut and grow a big beard, you might actually look the part. And so he grew this great big beard, which I didn't even know he could grow. I mean, I can't grow a beard, so I was surprised that Jay could grow such a big bushy beard. And also he needed his hair cut to look more medieval. And so now Hal is looking more the part, but it went to the actor that was, putting his best into it, and absolutely determined to get the role. I always think when you're casting, that's a good idea. If you can cast someone who is going to bring everything to it and really put their all in, you're gonna do well. So when Jay first got to the location down in Cornwall where we began the shoot, first thing he needed was to have his hair cut. He already had the beard, but he needed a haircut. And my auntie, who is a hairdresser, Auntie Shan, she was down on set cutting everyone's hair. Because it was coronavirus and it was lockdowns and everything, people, they didn't argue too much about needing to have their hair cut. I mean, if you look at Peter's hair, I mean, he's got this kind of hideous medieval haircut. Actually, no, I don't think it's. I think it's really stylish on him, actually. But everyone was sort of getting their hair cut in these absolutely bizarre medieval styles, which was kind of hilarious. The first day on set. This would have been the first day on set of the Bloody Tower shoot. Everyone was being sent off to the room where Sian was with her clippers to get their hair cut into medieval cuts. So Rhys had his bowl cut, and Peter had this cut for him. Derek had the whole back of his hair shaved off. Even our sound man Patrick went along and decided to have a medieval bowl cut as well, because why the hell not? Everyone was just joining in and getting these crazy haircuts. But I knew I wanted to go the full distance doing this in a medieval style, and I wanted the actors to fully commit and have their hair cut like it should be. And so they did. They were all really game for it. But on the day that Jay showed up, Auntie Sian had left. She needed to go off and do something or other. So she left her clippers and her scissors behind. And me, with absolutely no barber skills whatsoever, I had to cut Jay's hair myself. So, I mean, everybody laughed and mocked me because it took me about an hour, but, I didn't want to screw it up. And Jay's haircut was actually all my work. I shaved his head into this crazy little hairdo that he's got. This is in Bradford-on-Avon where we shot this particular scene. We all had to come back for an extra 3 days of filming towards the very end of post-production, really. We'd shot the film, and then this is July. We all reunited, and we had 3 days left to get. And so when we were filming before, back in March, it was freezing cold, and everyone was really happy to have these great big costumes on and all these layers. But this is July, so people were actually, Jay and Greg were actually dripping with sweat. It was such a hot, sweltering summer's day when we filmed this sequence, which was just like completely different to how the rest of the film was. I actually knew going into the shoot, I purposely wanted it to be, I wanted to see the weather. I wanted to see in this film the harsh conditions. I wanted it to be rainy. I wanted it to be muddy. I wanted it to be cold, because I kind of wanted to see the suffering of the characters. I said earlier that I'm not really interested too much in fantasy films, but one of the films that really did inspire me for this film, is one of my favourite films, is The King on Netflix with Timothée Chalamet. And what I love about The King is, there's a lot to love about that film, but just the sort of the mud and the sludge and the cold and the wet and the rain, you can feel it through the film, which is actually something I've learned from making horror films, from making stuff like when I made The Barge People. This was the first time I really learnt this lesson, because it's really, shooting can be no fun when it's winter and you're outside in the middle of nowhere in the mud and the rain and the cold. It can be really nasty, and your camera starts to get wet and you start to get rain in the lens, and it feels sort of mentally that it's not really going to plan, and that everything's starting to get a little bit rough. But this is certainly how I felt when I made The Barge People. But when I got back to the editing room and I actually looked at the footage of The Barge People, which all I could remember was sort of wind and rain and chaos, I looked at it and I was blown away by the footage of how effective sort of wind and rain and stuff really looks. On set it's a nightmare, but actually it looks gorgeous. So when it came to making this movie, I was kind of praying for horrible weather, and in my opinion we were quite lucky actually with quite tame weather. There were a couple of instances where it got really bad, which I'll point them out later. But obviously the actors very much moaning and groaning for having to walk out to these remote locations, and getting their feet wet and getting cold, and the wind and the rain and the late nights. But actually for me, I'd say this shoot was a fairly tame and comfortable shoot. It was never too cold, it was never too wet. We were actually quite lucky. I will say though, obviously I was not wearing a suit of armour, so that probably really made things much more uncomfortable, and people did struggle from time to time, just with like the weight of the armour and stuff like that. Sometimes you just have to have a break and just have a break from filming for a minute. This is over in Wales, and we started off the year 2021, me and Derek, with many days location scouting all around Wales and the Brecon Beacons, and basically finding the most interesting parts of the woods we could possibly find to shoot this movie, because I wanted the locations to look kind of epic fantasy locations. I didn't want it to look like we just went to any old woodlands. I wanted it to be a very specific type of woodlands. I wanted moss on the trees and fungus, and I wanted it to be dense. If I could, I wanted to find sort of crumbling stone walls, and like I said, I just wanted everything covered in sort of like moss and overgrown. And so these are the types of places we were able to find. So this place, this is basically, I looked around the outskirts of the Brecon Beacons, and I pinpointed a few accommodations that I could book for everyone to stay, accommodation that would take all of my actors. And I found 3 that were perfect. And so the first one that we drove to, just to check out the sort of surrounding area, basically I wanted to find places that were within walking distance, was here in Melancourt. So this is all shot in the sort of Melancourt waterfall area. Obviously Melancourt has fantastic waterfalls, which I really wanted to get into the film because they just look so epic, and you just get that extra production value and that sense of like a real fantasy world. So that's basically how I picked my locations. The place before where they were all looking at the map is a place called Blenheven, which I think is near Pontypool. I don't know Wales very much, but but we certainly drove all around Wales looking for these places. So Blenheven has this sort of like, it's right up high, and has those great sort of like big landscapes with the woodlands on the horizon that I really needed, and also within the woods the trees are just, they look so old. It's like ancient woodlands with these old twisted trees with twisted branches, so that's where that's where we shot those bits. And then here, this is over towards Melancourt, and there's a funny story about this campfire sequence, because we didn't realise we were filming on what we now know is private property. We just sort of showed up with our cars. We'd already done a scout. In the daytime, we'd walked around this place, and it was very remote. There was really nobody around. So, when it came to filming this scene, which we did over a couple of nights, we parked up our cars, walked down, lit this campfire, and shot this little scene, which is sort of right by a stream. And as we're shooting, I start to notice there's these lights in the forest. There's people walking around with torches in the distance, and it's as if they're trying to come over to us, but they can't find their way around the stream because it's such a sort of like remote bit of woodlands. But Greg had invited a couple of actors to come over and just sort of say hello, so we all assumed it was them. So we're filming this scene, and then about an hour or two, there's probably these people could have been looking for us for about an hour, and eventually after an hour, literally on this shot, this close-up of Greg here, suddenly all these torchlights start shining in, ruining my shot. I turn around, and there's like 5 or 6 policemen, with in all their gear and all their get-up, and they'd bought a riot van even, to come and find out what the hell was going on. And basically this is private property, this woodlands, owned by the surrounding farm, and basically the farmer had called because there were randomly a bunch of cars parked at the bottom of their drive by their farm, which now, yes, in hindsight, we can all see how that was quite alarming, because this is a remote place in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden there's this whole entourage of vehicles parked up, one of which, Greg's car, actually had the corpse that you saw hanging from the tree earlier. The corpse was strapped into, I think, a child's car seat. So there's the police shining their little torches in the windows of Greg's car, trying to figure out who's in their woods, and there's a bloody corpse sat in the back seat. But anyway, when they came across us, they thought we were there to sort of burgle the farm. Apparently the farms had been burgled before. I think they were pretty much quite relieved to realise that I don't know what they must have been thinking, but they stumble along a bunch of medieval knights sat around a campfire eating fish. And so they were actually really nice, and their main concern was, were we having some sort of illegal gathering, some illegal COVID lockdown gathering, because of course everyone was meant to be socially distancing, you were meant to be staying in your house, it was illegal to be meeting even outside unless you were meeting with your own household, all these crazy coronavirus rules. And here we were all just sort of laughing and giggling around the campfire, so they had to take everyone's details, and then they moved on, but it was all a little bit embarrassing. And we were supposed to have rabbits around that campfire. You saw the fish hanging earlier, but I couldn't figure out where to get rabbits from in the short amount of time. When you're filming, you don't have time to go and grab all these different things, and I'm a very, very small, tiny skeleton crew. In fact, I'll tell you, there's 3 people on my crew, for this film at least. It's me, Derek, and Patrick. Now, Patrick does all the sound. Derek is sort of like my right-hand man running around helping me out. But I am directing it and producing it, and I do all the camera work, and I did all the lighting, I did all the makeup, I did all the costumes, I chose all the locations, I'm in charge of all the props. Literally everything that is there is put there by one person, and that's me. Which is kind of bonkers, actually, to it does make me watch back the film and enjoy it on an extra level, to think that me alone basically has put everything here, you know, the makeup, the props, the costumes, the lights. You know, it's a little bit crazy, but it's something that works for me. And so anyway, on this day, I did not have rabbits, dead rabbits. I didn't know where to get the dead rabbits from, and so we had to just improvise, nip to the supermarket and get some fish. And so the line was supposed to be something about a rabbit's bollock. Thorfinn eats a rabbit's bollock, and that was Hal's line. But we had to change it to fish gonads. So there's me, you know, sort of desperately trying to Google, you know, do fish even have bollocks? You know, oh right, fish gonads. Okay, well that kind of doesn't really work, but you have to just work with what you got on the fly. And so in fact I had a little jar of they were like pickled mussels, and so that's what they pulled out of the fish. Jake pulls out a little pickled mussel, and that's what he tosses over to Peter, who was really not happy to be biting and chewing on a pickled mussel. He kicked up a bit of a fuss. I haven't mentioned in terms of casting actually Peter or Jake, who plays Percy. But Peter in the role of Thorfinn, I mean, I wrote him this character. I knew I'd worked with Peter on Vampire Virus. It was the first time we'd worked together, and he did a fantastic job. And he's a Norwegian actor, and I thought he could play this sort of like slightly sort of Viking, Scandinavian guy, Thorfinn. We decided we'd do this accent, which is a sort of inspired by like the show Vikings. It's this sort of accent. Peter says it's a sort of like standard sort of what people would use for sort of Vikings in TV shows and films. So he did this accent. His accent in real life is an American accent. He's even though he's Norwegian, he's learnt English in an American accent, and obviously I knew that was going to be completely inappropriate for my medieval film. So I asked him if he could do the accent, and he plays the lead role of Thorfinn, which, like I said, I wrote it for Peter. I really wanted to work with him again. I really wanted to see him in a sort of hero lead role, and I thought he'd be perfect because Peter's like a small guy, he's a short guy, but he's also a very muscly guy. So Thorfinn is this little village boy, and you know, he looks about 15 years old, 14 years old in my opinion in the earlier scenes. You know, around the nights he just looks like a tiny little village lad, you know. But actually when it comes to the end of the film and he's topless and he's got the teeth and the eyes and the blood all over him, I knew he would look really badass. So that was important to make. I mean, it's a very cliched fantasy film thing, but it was the transformation of a villager into an absolute warrior, you know, and I knew that Peter could do that. So it was a great time working with Peter. And then Jake was cast as Percy. He was also working on the film Bloody Tower. So he was playing Geoffrey in Bloody Tower, Percy in this one, and it made sense to sort of have him play those two characters across the two films. And this was the first time I'd worked with Jake. He worked on these two movies, and to be honest, Jake just sort of ended up having bad luck on all the films, because every day he would come would be a day where it was cold and rainy and the accommodation sucked. But I think he had a better time shooting Werewolf Castle than he did hanging upside down naked in the freezing cold in Bloody Tower. But I'll leave that till to the Bloody Tower commentary. This is the first werewolf fight of the movie, and just bloody difficult ever trying to film anything like this. I mean, action on location in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night. I mean, there we were walking with all of our kit and swords and armor and werewolf costumes. You can't see an absolute thing out of the werewolf costumes, by the way. Like, you are completely blind in these costumes. So that was a bit of a nightmare. Like, this whole thing was just a nightmare to film, which is why it's shot across multiple locations. So even that shot just there of Greg swinging the hammer around, that was in Melancourt back in March. And then the rest of, you know, Derek being ripped apart by the wolves and the rest of this fight now all takes place in Bradford-on-Avon. in July. So it's actually all this here is nice and warm. That's actually Peter and Jake inside the wolf outfits because we didn't have any other actors around to play them, and these were just sort of like pickup days where we got these extra shots. And it was about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning in Bradford-on-Avon, and we were filming sort of just off of a canal in these nice woods, which sort of vaguely matched what we had in Melancourt. And we did upset some of the people on the canal. We had someone come out and shout at us and tell us all to shut up and called us a bunch of noisy bastards and stuff. So I actually had to cut a lot of dialogue and screaming, and in fact I had to cut this whole fight scene down dramatically. I mean, Hal in the script was supposed to come in and really save the day and slice some werewolves to pieces, but you know, when it gets to 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. and you're up against it, you just sort of have to cut to the chase, especially when you've got angry locals on the canal shouting and screaming at you. And in fact, another incident where we had crazy locals after us. This is actually back in Blenheven, because like I said, in Blenheven in Wales, there's these amazing ancient trees and rocks around. So Peter actually climbed up this quite high tree actually, and he did actually dive out of it like that too. From up on those branches. So I knew I wanted to get this scene up this amazing tree, and that was something they had in Blenheven. And as we're filming this, suddenly I can hear quad bikes going around, I can hear dogs barking, and absolutely there was some search party out looking for us. They did not want us to be filming. Again, it was probably private property, but look, when you're on a low budget, you need to go in and just get the shots. Like, if you want your film to look good, you just have to go in. Obviously, you don't want to damage it, you don't want to do harm to anyone, or, you know, you don't want to be purposely trespassing or creeping anyone out. But if you want your film to look good, this is the problem with filming. I mean, nobody wants you to film anywhere. You know, you can't just even get the camera out on the street without someone having a go at you. So, you know, if you want it, you just have to go and take it. And so I took everyone out to these very remote locations and shot in the middle of the night, and just we did our best not to interfere with anyone. In fact, a part of that story I forgot to tell you, of the police with the riot van coming by to tell us off. The next day, the police had informed us, you're filming on private land, which we had no idea because it was just a public right away. I mean, in the daytime when we location scouted, there were dog walkers around and it just seemed fine. So they said I have to go up and ask the farmer for permission. And it was not the farmer the farmer who'd called the police. It was not their farm we were trespassing on, it was someone else's land. So I had to go to this person's land because we wanted to film in the same spot again the next day, but this time hopefully without the police being called on us. So I had to go up to this really creepy farm. I mean, it was like something out of a horror film. As I got out of the car, there were all these sort of like outhouses, these sort of cages with these gigantic scary dogs all screaming and barking and jumping, and the house was just this abandoned looking house. It looked like something out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I'm knocking on the door, and then this sort of hillbilly looking Welsh farmer comes out round the corner, and sort of is asking me what the hell I'm doing at his front door. And I basically just said, we're making a film in your woods and we didn't realise it's private land, but apparently it's private land, and we would be there for the next couple of days. So if he sees guys walking around in suits of armour with swords, that's just us, and he didn't really seem to care very much. He just sort of nodded and said that was all right. And I said that we'd had the police called on us, and he said that wasn't me. And then I said that it was probably the other farmer that had called the police, and I think he found that a little bit amusing. And that was basically it. And so we literally did go back to the same spot again the following nights, but we just parked our cars elsewhere. All this cave stuff that you're watching, it was shot a lot later on. This is in the July part, the 3 days we did in July. And this is the reason we had to wait till July, is because we could not find a cave. I knew I'd written into the script a cave. I mean, I filmed in cave caves before. I know that they're a really cool location that you can get hold of for a movie. And I knew it would make this film look really cool to have caves. So I needed to find a perfect cave. And come July, finally, we've got hold of a cave, which is my grandparents in Bradford-on-Avon. They had found this quarry, or they knew this person who owned this quarry, and he basically was very chill and just let us go into this cave. And these caves were amazing. Like, you walk in, they're absolutely gigantic, and there's just cave tunnel after cave tunnel. You can walk for about 45 minutes in a straight line. You'd never go down the same cave tunnel twice. We just went and filmed in those caves, and so we had the complete run of the caves. I wish I'd had longer in the caves to do more sort of werewolf chasing and all this sort of stuff, but unfortunately we didn't have time for that. But it was an amazing location, and we were just amazingly fortunate to get it, and that it was July, so it wasn't too cold. The waterfall that you just saw, that is Melancourt Waterfall. So if you want to go there, you just type in your Google map, Melancourt Waterfall Car Park, and you can go up there. And I just knew I wanted to get the really cool waterfall in the film because it just looks so sort of pretty and magical. And I'll also say, for this film, I mean, for me, this was a really ambitious project because you wanted to make a sort of higher production scale fantasy movie. I knew I needed, for example, like a drone. I'd never owned a drone. I'd never even flown a drone, but for this film I had to buy a drone. I knew I wanted one. I knew I needed drone shots, so I did all the drone shots myself, which I really enjoyed doing, and God, they just add so much sort of fantasy epicness into the movie, which I really like. And the other thing I had to buy was a sort of Steadicam rig, which again I'd never used before personally, but I bought one for this and for the Bloody Tower so that I could use them. But especially later on, when you see the sort of werewolf fight scenes, you'll see that the Steadicam really came in handy because I wanted these big long tracking shots where I was sort of following the action and sort of doing one takes of these big werewolf fights.
Not well enough.
Hello? Hey!
A lot of these sequences were shot all over the place. In fact, the shot that you just saw of Maggie, played by Emma Spurgeon Hussey, that was filmed right outside of Castle Koch, near Cardiff. And then you've got some of it happening at Melancourt Waterfalls, and then this bit is happening, we film later on at a place called Dynus Rock, which is not so far from Melancourt. But Thorfinn there picking up the hammer, that was down near Dynus Rock. Thorfinn there picking up the hammer, that was down near Dynus Rock. And then this here, I can't even remember where this was. This was somewhere near Melancourt, but you sort of park up and you come down this sort of like cliff face, and then we see this amazing opening of this cave with a river running through it. And I just knew that I needed that to be my entrance for the Dark Caverns. And I was really I was risking my drone by flying it right into the cave there. But you know, I'm all for, if you've got to get the shot, you've got to get the shot. So we just let that drone keep flying. It went all the way into the cave until I could see only blackness on my monitor. And then I sort of panicked and had to get the drone out of there. And here we are back in the caves. With the werewolves, I knew I wanted basically, there's 2 werewolves in the movie. There's 2 werewolf suits that I got made because that's all we could afford on the budget. But I knew I wanted to give the illusion of a sort of army of werewolves, if you like, or at least a whole group of them. So there's a lot of split screen throughout the movie. I mean, if you look really closely, you can probably see it. Or if it's not as good as I think, maybe you can really tell. But there's only 2 werewolves here. They're both Derek and Jay. In the werewolf suits, but I've done a bit of split screen, so it looks like there's 4 werewolves sleeping.
I want that flesh.
All this here in the cave is where, in the script, I really wanted to have... I mean, in the script there was all these chase scenes with werewolves, and Thorfinn was gonna, like, sort of fight with some werewolves and slash them and all this sort of stuff. But we were just really running out of time. I mean, this shoot had already gone a couple of days over schedule, and we just needed to sort of get on with it. I mean, in fact, even this scene here, Rhys and Peter are not actually together. Rhys had long gone home. This is on the same day, but Rhys had gone home earlier, and they're both sort of just acting at nothing. We were really at the point where we're just trying to scrape together all the different bits to make this sequence work, but what I really missed was getting some... it would have been amazing to have like all these werewolves chasing through the tunnels if only we just had a little bit of extra time. This was another really nice location. This is down on the other side of where the sort of river runs through the cave. And you can see in the background, you can actually see the river running through the cave that Thorfinn emerges from there. But just all those great big stones and caves and all the moss and everything just looks like really fantasy film. You know, Wales is full of locations that just give you incredible production value. And that there is the little mound where they're supposed to have buried Osmond. Derek did actually fall in a river trying to get all of those rocks gathered up.
My rescue Hal gave them feral dogs quite the fright.
Did you see Percy?
They made him one of their own.
How many were there?
Thorfinn killed one. They'll have fled by now.
This changes nothing. We must go on without you, Thomas. I'm sorry.
No!
He's wounded, slow, weak. He's in no state to fight.
We can't leave him behind.
Use your fucking head, Thorfinn! He's dying! All you've done is prolonged his suffering and burdened the rest of us.
Well, thank you very fucking much, Hal.
We won't survive another night out here. The wolves will come to finish us when we are most vulnerable, and we will all die.
I'll take care of him then.
He's twice your size, Thorfinn! This boy has a death wish. He's lost hope.
He has dignity, Hal, and humanity. Leaving a man behind is what they would do, because they are savages.
We'll take him as far as this next village. But he cannot make the full journey with us.
Fine. We'll seek shelter for him there. Okay, Thorfinn?
Where was this courage when your village fell? Answer me that. You want to talk like a knight? Then learn to dress like a knight and learn to defend yourself properly. Put that on. Come on. This blade will not be as effective as your axe. It's steel. This blade is silver, more powerful against the wolfmen. What, you thought you had a better attack than Hammerland's? It was merely a better instrument. Next time you won't be so lucky.
Which way to the village?
Follow me.
Once again, this is me risking losing my drone in a stream because I wanted to get these shots here, you know, flying right up the stream and getting all these cool angles on the rocks. But in fact, that one I did nearly lose the drone because it started to run out of battery and it started to sort of sink down into the river, and I had to really try my best to sort of fly it out of the river before it fell in. Here we are at the village of Chalamet, which obviously is the only location in the movie where things don't look quite as convincing as they probably should. But I didn't have the money to be filming this bit up in York. We'd already filmed at Merton Farm. We'd already established Grittleton Marsh. And so this was a whole other village, the village of Chalamet, which needed to be the sort of rundown woodland sort of like shack town. And so I just wanted these little mud shacks, which it looks like nothing on camera. And it just about is convincing on camera, but it doesn't look like any effort on camera. But God, making this village of Chalamet myself with a bit of help from Derek and Patrick was a bloody nightmare. What we've had to do is build 3 little huts, which you don't see very often because they don't look really good enough to show them too much. You don't want to look at them too much. But, you know, we had these great big pieces of chipboard. I'm drilling the pieces of chipboard together because they're actually quite big, the huts. And then I've covered them in expanding foam, which then sort of goes all sort of like rocky looking and sort of gravelly looking. You can sort of see one in the background there. And then I've painted them grey, and then we've put them up, stood them up, and then they've got like sort of little thatched roofs on the top, which were these, just got it from the garden centre, some sort of stuff to go and make it look like a thatched roof. And then that is Chalamet. But this was a nightmare day of filming because we had to get up bright and early at like 7 in the morning. I mean, for me, that is bright and early. My shoots notoriously, they don't start before 10 a.m. because I don't really get up before 10 a.m. I'm a late person. But these village of Chalamet huts, we had to get up bright and early. We had to go and put the huts up. I mean, it was about 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. when I was finally happy with the look of this village. But at first it just looked awful. Then I went and found a load of sort of hay and made little pathways of hay. And then I started hanging up silver in the trees and all this sort of stuff. And then you can see from this shot here, if I just frame the camera where there's a lot of foliage in the way, blocking the view of the huts, then the huts don't look quite so bad. So that's sort of how we had to go with this. But it was a pop-up location in Cornwall, in a little bit of woodlands. It was right next to where we filmed a load of Bloody Tower. This is actually the exact spot from my film The Barge People, where the characters are running away from a load of fish mutants. And again, this was Maggie's hut, the interior. This again was another little place where we thought we're going to need to build a set. So me and Derek actually did begin building a whole set. And then finally I realised that, it just wasn't looking realistic enough. And it was just too much of a challenge. Like I said, I was doing 2 films back to back, some of which did involve set building. In the film Bloody Tower that we shot with this, we had to build, for starters, a torture chamber, and this room here that Griff is in, this is the exact same room. It's the same torture chamber, just redressed. But no, we built a set of the King's bedroom for Bloody Tower. So we had all these tasks, we had all this work to do, all this pre-production, building the jail cells for Bloody Tower, putting everything together, getting Maggie's cottage together. So in the room adjoining this one, where you could actually barely stand up in, I realised that actually we could kind of make it look good enough to be Maggie's cottage. And so Maggie's hut is in one of these little rooms with the sort of stonework, which I never guessed that we'd be able to film whole scenes in such a tiny, tiny little space. I mean, on camera, it actually looks much, much bigger than it really is. But Maggie's hut is so small, you can barely move around in it, and we all were there trying to cram ourselves in and get some scenes filmed, which was an absolute nightmare. It was definitely the worst day of filming for me, just because of the cramped, enclosed space. It was just horrific. But yeah, this is we were basically utilising as many areas around the farm as we possibly could. So this is the stables, and I mean, you can see in the set dressing there's loads of stuff that we could sort of scavenge from round the farm. This little whatever that is, little badger trap or rabbit trap or whatever, all these chains hanging from the roof, which everyone would be always walking into and hitting their heads and their faces on. But no, that was just the way. But yeah, you're able to make something out of not very much. You're able to sort of pull together a few locations. You'll see in a minute where Peter walks out. He's walking out of one of the houses in York. This thing here, one of the mud huts in York. I just figured I'd get that shot of York just to add a bit of production value into there to establish the blacksmith's room. But yeah, you can see here how. You can sort of see how small Maggie's hut is, but it really worked, It really all came together.
Got a bit of a tickle in my throat.
Don't eat it, Hamlin.
What's in this exactly?
We're never safe here.
Emma Spurgeon Hussey, who you see here playing Maggie, she had worked with me many times before. She's in a whole bunch of my films, English Haunting and A Werewolf in England, and she's local to Cornwall, so I brought her back for this little role of Maggie. She's always sort of the go-to for a sort of slightly psychotic madman character. And then Griff the blacksmith is played by a guy called Ricardo, who I was working as crew on a whole other movie the year before, a film called The Mutation, which was shot under a different title, Rats Reborn, for director Scott Jeffrey. And Ricardo was the lead actor in that film, and I got to know him just sort of working as crew, which is something I very rarely do. I usually just do my own movies. There's my little cameo in the film, which was just, I mean, I'll come back to the Ricardo story, but my little cameo, I had built for Bloody Tower, I had built a grave in Cornwall, and my whole idea was to get some more of the kids. Jamie, who I said he was my sort of step brother. He has a couple of brothers, and then I have a brother, and I was going to get all these sort of young guys down in a pit in this sort of grave set that we'd built for Bloody Tower. But anyway, we ran out of time and we couldn't manage it. And so it was the last shot that I needed to get for this whole movie. But an absolutely pivotal shot to make this Village of Chalamet sequence work. And so it was just shot on my balcony on my flat in London, and me and another actor, David Lennox, who's in all my movies. We just had to sort of we made little costumes out of Hessian potato sacks, sat on the balcony covered in blood, and that was sort of the only way we could get it. That was the little cameo. But anyway, back to Ricardo, who you can see here having a great little fight scene with Jay. Ricardo, I basically made friends with him on the set of this film, The Mutation, and again, I put out the casting call, and when he applied for Griff, I sort of didn't see him as Griff, which is kind of crazy to me now, but he did an amazing set of self-tapes actually. He sent sort of 3 versions like Griff, with a Scottish accent, Griff a bit more sort of crazy, and all these different versions of Griff. And I'm so glad that I cast him as Griff. I think he did a fantastic job playing this crazy little guy, and he just brought so much to the character. There was actually more scenes with Griff. In fact, in the whole film, this is where most of the edits happened, trying to cut out scenes. Here's Patrick again, you can see in the background, once again roped into playing a sort of henchman for Wolfstan there. And then another actor who goes uncredited, Jamie Seal, who was playing a character in the Bloody Tower. And again, on the day of his filming for the Bloody Tower, we needed to quickly grab these bits of Wolfstan for Werewolf Castle, and so that's how he's ended up there in the movie very, very, very briefly. These two just did a fantastic job of this fight scene. I mean, this is the thing with shooting fight scenes, is it requires so much effort, especially when you're wearing a suit of armor. I mean, I just made these guys do this again and again and again, and they were both really up for it and really game. And there's my balcony again. I didn't get a shot of the blood splattering for Griff being sliced, and so there I was in the middle of the night on the balcony throwing a cup full of blood at the wall and making a huge mess. Now we're back in Melancourt, in the same woodlands where we had the hanging corpse from the tree earlier, to do this werewolf chase sequence. And the biggest nightmare of shooting in places like this on the sort of outskirts of the Brecon Beacons was just the weather. It would literally go from 1 minute it would be sunny, the next minute it would be raining, and then in the case of this scene it would just hailstorm. And in fact, so when they were talking back there, we were literally waiting for hailstones to stop falling from the sky. Now in this shot it's sunny. This is all shot within an hour, now it's really hot and sunny, and then by the time they finish running it's rainy. And that sums up the experience of working out in a place like this. The weather just changed all the time. I will speak a little bit about the werewolves. I mean, I think the werewolves, the people who made the werewolves, Midnight Studios Effects, they've done a fantastic job, and I love their werewolves. But it's a huge ask for a low-budget movie to be like a werewolf movie. Werewolves are so difficult. Unless you've got a whole load of money, you cannot afford animatronic heads. Even if you could afford animatronic heads, you couldn't really, unless you're like at a Hollywood level, you couldn't really have them sort of running around and attacking in wide shots like we have here. It's really difficult. So when the film was sort of done, it remains my biggest worry with the film, is that the werewolves kind of, sometimes you'd be looking through the camera, you think you're filming The Muppet Show or something like that. It kind of, they're flapping around like characters out of Fraggle Rock or something like that. But the whole end of the film had to be changed because the werewolves were not as convincing as I wanted them to be. But they are still magnificent costumes. It's just the ambition, to want to do werewolves at a budget level of this, where you don't have an amazing effects team actually on hand on set. You're just using costumes and doing your very best. Another element, again, like the werewolves, that kind of worries me slightly is these arrows. I found it really difficult actually to get hold of arrows. like great big wooden arrows that would do the job. You know, obviously they're meant to have like pierced armor, so I did buy some arrows, but it was actually Patrick who looked at them and thought they looked way too modern, and that he was absolutely right. They were sort of modern metal looking arrows, and so Patrick went and got some twigs and sort of carved them up with a penknife to look like arrows, which does ultimately look much better than what I had. But this is all the thing of like low budget filmmaking. You just have to sort of, when you're doing it all yourself, you just have to sort of go with what you can, and you have to improvise on the spot. And so we did with these little arrows, which maybe just about works. Again, here you can see an example of the split screen I was talking about. You know, we got 4 werewolves coming along in a minute with Wolfstan and his dodgy wig. And we did this by split screen, so it's the same 2 werewolves, but creates this impression that, you know, there's a whole sort of world of werewolf creatures, you know, which really adds to the movie. This here is a whole new location. This is Dinas Rock, which was not so far from Melancourt in Wales. And again, we were on our location scout, and I knew I wanted this sort of cliff face that I needed Thorfinn to climb up. And Dinas Rock, it is quite steep. Like, what he's climbing here is pretty steep, but it's not so steep that it's dangerous. Like, I mean, it's definitely dangerous, but it's not so steep that anyone's at risk of sort of falling down it if they're being careful. Which, you know, we were all being very careful. It's high, but it's fairly steep, but it's not too bad. Like, if you hold on and be careful, you're not going to fall. And I just thought it would give it that authenticity. So here we are, actually, to film this. You know, I've climbed up the side of this rock face with my camera, and it was a little dodgy at times. It was steep. But yeah, it's a place called Dinas Rock. This part is kind of round the back of Dinas Rock. So you've got this huge rock that I guess people do rock climbing and stuff on. It's a bit more of a sheer cliff edge looking, a more sort of flat drop. This round the back and side of it is more like easy to climb up. It's a bit more sort of like a staircase. And the good thing about it was nobody could see us. So here's Peter covered in blood and armour and screaming and crying, and nobody could really see what we were doing, and nobody really came and interfered, which was perfect. There was some people sat on a bench at the bottom of the rock, and when Peter was doing this bit, screaming, howl, and all this sort of stuff, they were sort of looking all around. And again here, a great location to get shots with my drone. I was flying it all around. I did have a bit of an accident with the drone, which I wish I was filming through the drone, but I wasn't even recording, but I flew the drone into the top of the cliff, and it came smashing down. Like, it looked to me like it was getting shattered to pieces, and we were pretty much certain that the drone was demolished, but the drone was very sturdy and somehow survived it. Talking of having to be sturdy, Peter was also a real trooper doing these scenes. I mean, not only was it an absolute effort having to keep climbing this rock again and again, and this took us almost a whole day to film, actually. We used pretty much all the daylight of the day to film this scene. I had so many different shots, because this is a sort of segment of the film where there's kind of not much dialogue at all. The film kind of stops for like 15 minutes or so, and there's barely a line spoken. But these rocks were really sharp, and I remember Peter's hands, the palms of his hands were all sort of cut and bloody because the rocks are kind of sharp, and I kept getting him to sort of dive and fall. I mean, by this point, we're getting to the end of the shoot here. He was really exhausted, and you can tell in his performance. I think it actually quite adds to it. But yeah, it was getting to the point of like, you know, people were getting bruised and battered and exhausted by this point. I actually started filming Werewolf Castle. I think it was over 20 days into the overall shoot. You know, I said that for 6.5 weeks we were filming Bloody Tower and Werewolf Castle, and we pretty much filmed the whole of Bloody Tower first, and then we went over to Werewolf Castle. So by the time it was actually day 1 of filming on Werewolf Castle, we were on like day 25 or something like this. And I actually remember on day 25 when all the cast of Bloody Tower left, and then the new cast, you know, Peter and Jay and everyone arrived. I was already actually quite exhausted, and it was like, oh my god, there's a whole other film to shoot. So the first day was a nightmare to get through, and then it started to go quite smoothly, and by this point I was just enjoying myself. This is Castle Koch, which is near Cardiff. Obviously it's not at the top of Dynus Rock. We climbed right to the top of Dynus Rock, and I'll tell you, it was extremely high and really quite scary how high up we were, but we got that shot of Peter coming over the edge, and it matches quite nicely with Castle Koch, which is actually very high up, and luckily it kind of matches. So we have Thorfinn going towards the castle, but then actually the interior of the castle, which, I mean, it kind of blatantly doesn't quite match what was on the outside, but this interior is a completely different castle. This is Raglan Castle. But it was really important to me that when Thorfinn gets to the castle, he finds this sort of ruined castle. And Raglan was just absolutely perfect because, you know, I mean, look at it. It's gorgeous ruined castle, this big courtyard. I just pictured this battle sequence with these werewolves. And I just knew it was going to be really cool. So that's where we're filming here, is Raglan Castle. And then Castle Koch was actually we did use it. The interior of the castle is what we use in the film The Bloody Tower. And we use the exterior for Werewolf Castle. And then with Raglan, we've used the interior for Werewolf Castle, but we've used the exterior as the Tower of London for the Bloody Tower. So this is really where the scenes started to, each shoot day, and even within a day, the scenes from the different films started to mingle. And so you've got bits of filming to do on this one, and then, you know, in the afternoon you'd be filming a whole different movie. But yeah, Raglan Castle was a fantastic location, and I loved the look of it. As soon as I saw this staircase, I knew I wanted this shot of the werewolves all sat on the staircase and Thorfinn having to sort of climb up the stairs with all the wolves all around him, sort of standing guard, if you like, sort of like guard dogs. Yeah, I knew that was something I really wanted. But at these castles, there was an extreme time pressure because they were extremely expensive. The castles cost £3.50 per minute to film in, and we shot there for 5 days. And in fact, when you add the VAT, it was £4 per minute. But I kept telling everyone, guys, this is £3.50 per minute, and we need to hurry up and we need to work really fast. So there was no time for faffing about. We had to absolutely crack on with it and get as much material as we possibly could, which was really hard and really stressful. We were extremely lucky with the weather. This is the very first bit of filming we did at Raglan Castle. And the very first bit of filming we did at the castles. We did all the castles, because they're quite near to each other. We did all the castles in the space of 5 days. And this is the very first bit we did in a nice sort of overcast. It was exactly what we wanted, really. This actor here is Dave, who I'd never worked with before. I'd written the part for another actor. I'd written it for a regular of mine, Barrington Delaroche. But as I say, we were working in the height of COVID. You know, we were, as filmmakers, exempt from the lockdown. So we were able to all meet up and do this whilst everyone else was locked away indoors. But, you know, people at risk of coronavirus and with any health conditions, could not come and be on the set. And Barrington could not come over and do this. And so right at the last minute, I had to hire in a whole new person. So I put out a new casting call for King Vortigern, which is a really crucial role. And Dave applied.
My family destroyed. I braved Regan Forest. Watched my friends meet their deaths fighting, all for me to be here with you right now. I beg you, my king, bring an end to this evil.
You're somehow brave, Tenderfoot, but evidently a fool.
Better to die a man than to live as half beast.
Then die you will.
Thorfinn! No! No, let him go!
Harry. My only living son finally returned.
I am not your blood.
Oh, I think we're quite alike, you and I. We both share the same thirst for butchery. Killing your own brother in battle? That's the kind of bloodlust that's in our bones, Hal.
Bones that I'd like to break, old man.
Why is it so fucking difficult for you to accept my intentions? You think it's almighty, so powerful? Well, this is power, Hal. A gift you refuse to accept.
I don't need to trade my humanity to be great. You coward! That's the only reason why you despise me.
Great! You think you're so great, do you? Look at you. Captured, shivering. Well, before you die, let's see the Tenderfoot accept his allegiances to me and not to my pitiable progeny.
Leave the boy alone, father.
I will not. Let's see where his loyalties lie. I want you to witness the weakness of men, the inadequacy of what you so desperately cling to. Ready, Hal? Let's see you scream.
Stop! Stop it!
I offer you one chance, boy. Join with us, or suffer the same ignominious defeat.
Don't do it, Thorfinn. Thorfinn!
I will join you.
Again.
I will join you!
I'm sorry, Hal. But you see, I win.
my previous film, A Werewolf in England, I'd not paid too much attention really to the lore and mythology of werewolves. And one thing that you definitely can't really show when you're doing low budget werewolves is transformation sequences. And so going forward to do yet another werewolf film, I thought I needed to try and incorporate some werewolf elements for the werewolf fans. And one of those was I really wanted this sort of like blood initiation sequence, like this thing that triggers the transformation of the werewolves. And so that's why I've added these bits in. Obviously Jake had one earlier and Peter gets one here of Wolfstan sort of biting, licking. I wanted it to be sort of like primal and bloody and lots of also sexual, because there's a sort of there's all this sensual licking and spitting and dribbling all over each other and biting.
No. You're meant to be one of us now.
Well, here we are at the moment the whole film's sort of been leading up to, and Peter just looking absolutely badass in the freezing cold in Wales in I don't know, probably March by this point. You know, it was not comfortable for a lot of the actors. I mean, Peter's here with fake teeth in, these horrible contact lenses that were probably hurting his eyes, and God, it was cold. For me it wasn't cold, but for Peter you could really tell. It was winter in Wales, and here was Peter topless all day long for about 3 days in a row, and not only topless but wet, you know, covered in this sticky blood. So Auntie Shan was sort of on hand with a nice warm coat that she'd come and wrap Peter in any time between takes. And poor is Jay and Derek in the werewolf costumes there, and a lot of split screen. But poor Jay and Derek, as I say, completely blind, not knowing where they're going, getting sort of elbowed in the face and hit in the face with a foam sword and all this sort of stuff. You know, this sequence was really difficult to do. The guys were fantastic because between them they managed to choreograph their own little fight sequence, which they were then able to just do again and again and again. And in fact, I was able to film it as a one take. A whole bunch of times we did this whole fight sequence, we did it as a one take thing. No cut, just the camera following these guys around. But unfortunately, the werewolf costumes, you really have to keep your eye on sort of the joins in the costume, and when you've got werewolves diving and fighting and jumping around on each other with such sort of viciousness as we do in this film, you're going to see the joins, you're going to see the neck, you're going to see the elbows, and especially the bum. You know, the werewolves' bums were always exposed. So I had to cut into it and somehow make this fight scene work. It was also longer, it went on even longer, and had more fighting happening outside this little alleyway actually. But again, because of the joins in the costumes, and you know, basically you don't want to show the werewolves too much in a werewolf film, you know, to make the effect work. But there's a huge problem with that in this film, which is we had to shoot these castles in the daylight because you're spending £3.50 per minute on a castle. You want to see the detail of the castle. You want to see the epicness of the location. But having said that, if you want it to be creepy, you want it to be nighttime. Well, at nighttime, the size and scale of the lights and the amount of time it would take for my lighting to actually make the castles look good at nighttime, it was just not possible. And so I wanted to show them in the daylight. The film's called Werewolf Castle. We have to see the castle, so we have to show the castle in the daylight. And if you're showing the castle in the daylight, you're going to also be showing all the werewolves in the daylight. In the dark, it's much easier to make them look convincing and cool. One of the adjustments I did make to the werewolf costumes from my previous film, A Werewolf in England, is that some werewolf fanatics really didn't like the fact that the werewolf masks didn't move, in that the heads didn't have moving mouths and eyes and all that sort of stuff. Which I also, I would absolutely love if I had animatronic heads. They'd look fantastic, but this isn't Hollywood film. This is much lower budgeted than that. And so we just do the best we can to make these werewolves look as good as they actually do. But so for this film, I asked Midnight Studios Effects if they could make the mouths movable, which they were on this one. Unlike Werewolf in England, which was much more of a sort of comedy and much more campy, so I didn't mind too much if the werewolves didn't look realistic. I mean, they're not really supposed to. It's a silly comedy movie. But in this film, I wanted them to look a little bit more realistic, at least to have some movement in the face, which is why you had a few shots earlier where Derek is actually puppeteering the werewolves to sort of like open their mouths and roar and stuff like that, which just adds a little bit of something extra to these particular wolves. And the ending sequence that you just saw there was something that we completely had to come up with on the fly. What was supposed to happen is Thorfinn gets dragged off into the castle, and the king laughs like you saw he laughed, and then the king was supposed to then transform himself into a werewolf, and then Thorfinn was then going to emerge in werewolf form, because obviously he's been transformed into a werewolf by this point. So Thorfinn was actually meant to emerge in full werewolf form, and we shot this. And it was this big slow motion fight where the king and Thorfinn as werewolves had this big old fight in the castle. So there we are filming. It's £3.50 a minute going down the drain, and it just looked dreadful. It just, especially in slow motion, just these big fluffy things jumping around. It just looked awful. And aside from them being completely blind, and Derek got absolutely punched in the face by Jay at one point and just totally knocked him out, sent him down to the floor. Apart from the difficulties of that sort of a thing, it was just a nightmare, and it just looked awful. So we went home from our castle shoot, and I knew in my head we needed some sort of a new ending. And so Thorfinn never transforms into a wolf now, and the king doesn't transform into a wolf. We managed to just do it where they're dragged back into the cave. I mean, thank God they dragged Thorfinn into the darkness before he re-emerged as a werewolf. Otherwise I would have been a bit screwed, but because they dragged him off, I was then able to have him dragged into the cave. And back in those caves in Bradford-on-Avon, we were able to come up with this whole different scene where Thorfinn just jumps on the king and bites his face, and we had very little time to quickly get it. It was the last thing we shot of the main bulk of the shoot, and Peter was absolutely knackered by that point. Here we are back in New York with all our extras for the final scene of the movie. And it was important for me, when I was writing this movie, it is a very typical fantasy movie. The boy goes on the journey. But by the end, I did want to do some more slightly interesting things, or I call it sort of more to my style and taste, which is I liked the idea that Thorfinn, he's kind of sacrificed himself. He is a hero, and he's still got the werewolf blood in him. And just the final shot, I just knew in my head I wanted the final shot of the film to be Thorfinn's severed head just laying on the floor. It's sort of such a nasty, sort of cruel ending, because he's a nice little character. But I just knew that I wanted that to be the way the film ends, with everyone chanting Thorfinn. And so that's the shot that we've got coming up here, which is a really cool shot to sort of end the whole movie on.
To Thorfinn! 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 To Thorfinn!
And they all lived happily ever after. So thanks guys for listening to my commentary. I hope you learned a few little interesting things about the shoot of Werewolf Castle. It was a really fun shoot, and everyone had a blast making it. So and I'm pleased with the movie. You know, like I said, I don't know if I'll be going back to doing fantasy anytime soon, but it was really cool to try something like this. And certainly my fascination with werewolves continues, and I hope to do more werewolf stuff in the future. But yeah, thanks for watching guys, and thanks for listening, and please go and check out my next film, and maybe there'll be a commentary on that, who knows.